Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Extended Enterprise, Bring Training to Multiple Audiences. My name is Melissa, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's start with some brief introductions. Our presenters today are David Wentworth, who is the Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, Francis Clevin, who is the Director of Enterprise Success and Customer Experience at LearnUpon, and Aisling McNamara, who is the Senior Learning and Development Manager at LearnUpon. I would like to extend a thank you to LearnUpon for sponsoring today's webinar. LearnUpon's mission is to partner with businesses that believe delivering great learning is essential to achieve great results. The company's learning management system is powered by leading technology and provides companies with a centralized hub to easily create and manage learning programs for every audience in an engaging, learner-friendly way. LearnUpon partners with over 1,300 customers to champion simple, learner-centric experiences for over 13 million learners across over 30 countries globally. And Brandon Hall Group also recognizes LearnUpon as a Platinum Smart Choice Preferred Provider. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we have several certification programs currently open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. You can visit certification.brandonhall.com for more information. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare, and see any topics that you would like to take a survey for, it's always greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, and you can always visit brandonhall.com for the latest list. All participants do receive a piece of complimentary research once the results have been analyzed. And last but not least, I'd like to cover a few logistics before we get started. To ask questions throughout today's presentation, we ask that you please use the questions panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is being recorded. We will share a link to the recording and a PDF version of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. The chat is also open for today, and I see that some of you are already popping in to say hello, so thank you for that. We do invite you to join in on today's discussion and share your thoughts with us as we go. Or, as I mentioned, simply pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining in from today. And last but not least, if you would like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. And without any further delay, I will hand things over to Dave so we can dive right in.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me and also Francis and Aisling today, because it's going to be great to talk about a little bit of the extended enterprise. And, you know, many of you on the line may be familiar with that term and know exactly what we're talking about. Others of you may have found your way here through some of the other descriptions of the extended enterprise. So we're going to get into what we mean by what, you know, the extended enterprise can be for different organizations, different types of cases, where this need may exist. And we'll talk about some of the benefits around why delivering training and learning to some of these external audiences can be so important, as well as the challenges in doing so. And then we'll do a bit of a focus on technology, because technology plays a big part in being able to do this right. So looking at what's required, what works, things to look for from a technology standpoint, as well as other things to think about as you roll out your extended enterprise learning strategy. So with that, I just want to jump right in and start looking at some of the research that we've done in this area to try to understand what's going on in with the extended enterprise. And the place that I'd like to start is actually even bigger than that, right? I wanted to focus in a little bit on overall goals for the business. You know, so one of our more recent studies, we asked organizations to what degree are the following things a priority for your business, and 78% of organizations selected saying improving the customer experience is a priority. So that made that number one on the list. So improving customer experience. Right behind that, we're trying to gain market share. Right, we're trying to gain new customers. And DE&I was the third business priority. But you can look at some of these others too, around developing new products and services. We're trying to improve the brand recognition, get more people aware of what we do. And I bring this up because a lot of these outcomes that's the business is after are things that can be served through an effective extended enterprise learning strategy. And Francis, I wanted to give you an opportunity here to sort of talk a little bit about this. And I talk about it in terms of you and your organization work with a lot of different organizations who are doing these things and leveraging extended enterprise learning. So maybe you could share a little bit about how this relates to some of the clients you work with.
Yeah, I thought the improving customer experience bit was interesting because I think there's some probably different themes to unpack there about how businesses are thinking about this and what they might call customer experience. So I think there's something that we're seeing around looking to improve the customer experience that in a way that has an impact on revenue, on Net Promoter Score, or another metric there, on product adoption, on time to launch. And so really thinking about improving the customer experience that brings real revenue and maybe some other value to the business. And then there's the other side of customer experience that is around reducing the costs in supporting customers. And so that may be around onboarding costs for customers, around support or customer success costs to customers. And I think that a really robust strategy in the extended enterprise space is thinking about all of those of how do we provide a customer experience that helps our customers better utilize and grow with our product. And then how do we also provide training that makes the best use of our resources so that we're not spending time on duplicating in-person trainings or travel and things like that. So that was an interesting one to me, just to unpack. And then gaining market share, I find this really exciting, that the idea that your training program, and I'll say this on the employee side too, but that your training programs can really provide a reach, and whether that's a goal around, a nonprofit or an NGO or around a commercial enterprise, the idea that your training programs can help you scale the amount of people that are aware of your product or organization. And I love the idea that training can provide those types of business results, and that they're not necessarily just a cost center to deliver a service.
Right. And just exactly what you're saying is, this data that we're looking at here is from one study where we asked from a very, big picture business priorities perspective. But then when we look at the results from our extended enterprise learning study, which is obviously very focused on this topic of extended enterprise, we asked what are the benefits of doing this kind of training, being able to deliver learning to these different audiences. And you can see some of the things, just like you're saying, the ability to increase awareness of products and services, right? Be able to get that information out there to people who need it, improving those customer relations by providing training so people get the best, most optimal use of the products and services that your organization provides. Plus, they're less likely to need help and support, so they're not frustrated because they understand the product, they understand the services because of the training. It helps keep the organization within compliance parameters. And you mentioned also reducing costs around travel time. That's in here as well. So all of these things, improving client retention, right? These clients that have a better understanding of the products are more likely to stick around, more likely to purchase new and other products that are available. And of course, reducing those client support interactions is a great cost savings for the organization. So you start to see areas in which where learning can actually, like you said, move away from being a cost center to actually reducing costs in a lot of ways and adding to the bottom line. And in some cases, even directly, and we'll get into sort of generating revenue in a little bit. But by expanding the scope of the learning and programs within the organization to these external audiences, you're able to achieve a lot of these goals that are aligned directly with the outcomes of the business. And really, that's ultimately what L&D wants to do anyway, right? Is help the organization meet its goals. And we see here that, obviously not every single organization is going to have a need to deliver training to any of these external audiences, but we found that nearly 60% of companies say that they do need to do that. And obviously our group on the phone today here on this webinar is probably a little bit self-selected. You're probably interested in this topic because your organization is, looking into this, is focused on this, does this, this kind of work. But the majority of organizations, at least in our studies, do say that they have to reach out to these audiences. And so, well, who are these audiences that we're talking about here? And it could be, there's a wide variety. That could be just one of these audiences that an organization needs to reach. It could be multiple of these audiences, whether it's contract contingent workers. We've seen a growth in the gig and work environment. So these are people that don't necessarily work for the organization, but they are going to need training on their particular job or role. And so we need to deliver learning there. Or customers, as we probably have mentioned quite a bit already, the idea that customers need training on the organization, on the products, and all those kind of interactions. But it goes beyond that too. There's distributors, resellers, people who sell your products among others. Need to be trained and up to speed on your latest and greatest products, all the features and functionality, whatever you have there. Franchisee models. So you've got a lot, I think, of stores and restaurants where there are some restaurant brands that are almost exclusively franchisees, that the actual brand owns almost none of the locations. It's all owned by independent franchisees. So these people aren't necessarily employees of the organization, but they and their employees need to have the kind of training that present the right kind of experience for their customers. And so it really shows that this, the extended enterprise is really a much bigger environment than a lot of organizations think of when you start to take all of this into account and start to take a real mental picture of who is involved and who can be touched by these training needs. And so, it gets down to it. It's really important to understand what the needs are for these groups. And for instance, if you talk a little bit more about this need, if you're an organization that provides some sort of products to your customers, how important it is that there's training along with that in a lot of cases.
Yeah, this is where Aisling and I have a lot of synergy in thinking about so from my perspective, the importance of training our customers on our product and not just on, the what button does what, or, how to upload a video, but really training them on the strategy around the product, on workflows around the product, on getting them to think more deeply about how they're using the product in the organization. Those are really meaningful things. And we use a combination of in-person and on-demand content here, where we can say we're delivering high quality content that is on demand to train you on the functionality of our product. And that's available at any time. And you can come back to it. And if a new person joins your organization, they have access to that training. And we've spent a lot of time and resources internally to build that on-demand training, so that then we have that foundation when we are speaking in person, whether that's virtually or actually in person, we can then start to dig into those conversations around the strategy about how we're using that product. So for us, this might be different for others, but for us, it's not about reducing the time that we're spending with our customers, but it is about enhancing the quality of the time. I used to work in public higher education, and that was the conversation that I would have with university faculty around using technology, and to say, this isn't about taking you away from your students. This actually is just about increasing the quality of the time that you're spending with your students, so that delivering a verbatim lecture for 90 minutes with no interaction is not quality time with your students. We can flip that around and do that in a different way. And so product training absolutely is the foundation of how we work with our employees, our customers, and now more recently our partners in building our strategy as a company and helping them realize their business strategies as well.
Yeah, and I think there's just a really nice crossover for us, Francis, in terms of maybe some context to share that's useful. Our customer training was more advanced and developed than our employee training. We had our customer university set up and operating to a really high standard before I joined the company, and we were able to share some of those learnings. And I think most companies are doing some sort of training with their customers' employees, but one might be leading the other. So I think it's a really great way, if you're internal focused like I am, to build a relationship with your customer focused team. You know, you can share technology, you can share learnings, you can, really deep dive into what's impactful. And it's just a really nice synergy, as we were saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, circling back to those the business goals, right? The business priorities and how we tie extended enterprise learning to those. So we saw organizations are focused on gaining market share. So how does extended enterprise learning feed into that? Well, you can improve the selling power of your brand, because if you've got a reseller network, other partners that sell your products, or among other products, the more knowledgeable they are about your products, the more likely they are going to be comfortable talking about them with prospects, and more likely to sell those. The salespeople, they want to be confident, and so they're going to tend to focus on the products that they feel the most comfortable with, that have the most knowledge on. So it's really important to have that kind of arrangement, that kind of relationship. Plus, you also want to make sure these people are up on all the latest information about your products. And so they're constantly putting your best foot, your best information out there first. There's also the ability to leverage extended enterprise learning to tap into the supply chain. So if you go in the other direction from sales and you go into like distributors, manufacturers, and organizations that you work with to get raw materials or other products or other services, as well as maybe anybody else that's involved in that supply chain. They may be operating in different parts of the country or different parts of the world than your organization. Being able to have those connections, and the training goes in that direction about how your organization operates, how best to make the most of that relationship. You've now got that kind of relationship in those areas. It helps to establish that global presence, but it also, in general, being able to put the best information out there from a learning perspective gives you better exposure for all the products and services that you offer. We saw also in that list improving innovation and delivering new products and services. So these training engagements, these learning partnerships, they improve the collaboration that you have with your suppliers and your manufacturers. There's a better connection to the customers. So you're able to understand who they are, what they're thinking, and what their needs are. And then that also provides opportunities to upsell, right? The more your customers are engaged with you and your products, the better understanding they have, the more likely they are to explore new opportunities with you. And then the third one that I just pulled out of that list around the customer experience, which is obviously key among all things, is really building that customer experience. So obviously training means that you're able to extend the relationship that you have after the sale. It isn't, here's our product, please buy it, and then that's it. We're not going to talk anymore. This training and the learning experience is an extension of that relationship, keeps it going after the sale. Also, we live in an age of a very well-informed consumer. If people have a question, they're going to go and find answers wherever that may be. So the more opportunity you have to provide the answers and the information to the customer, the more likely they're going to have the right information for you, rather than finding out, from other sources and maybe not have the right information. And we mentioned this before, is that, reducing the reliance they have on customer support. None of the clients, as great as your support desk may be, customers don't want to contact your support desk. That means that something has gone wrong. So the less amount of time that we can have customers calling in or creating support tickets, the better. Training helps alleviate that to a very large extent. But Francis, talk a little more about how this strategy helps keeps customers informed on products.
Yeah, I think this is a challenge for any SaaS company and Aisling can talk about on the employee side of things, but it's definitely something that I have seen as a challenge in the last 4 years that I've been with LearnUpon and software companies in the past of how are you out in front of the product releases and new features that you're developing so that your customers are informed about them as soon as they hit the ground, they have all the information that they need. And again, to then create a space where they understand what the product is, they understand how to use it, they know where to go for resources, but then you can engage in conversations about how they do this strategically. So that's been something that we have worked really closely with our product and our marketing team on around how do we make sure that we have on-demand training and information available to our customers as soon as a new feature hits the ground. We're specifically in software, but we also have customers. I have one customer who they sell outdoor equipment for sports and mountaineering and all sorts of things. And they have new products that are releasing all of the time, and they need to train their distributors on those products, what they are, how to use them, whether it's installing a ski rack on a car or lacing up a hiking boot. And they need to be able to distribute that information immediately because there are people on the ground who are selling that, who need to talk to their end users or their end consumers about that. So it's both a need for scale and expediency to use technology in this way. And then again, really as a way to increase those business results. So the more information and training we can get to our consumers, then the more they can be using our product and growing their own businesses.
Right. And as we step into sort of some of the challenges that doing this, brings up, I wanted to touch on something that Heidi mentioned in the chat around the fact that they're a software company and they do internal training for employees, but they're going to be moving to partners and then customers. And so I would say that the great thing about what we have today for you is that not only is LearnUpon is sponsoring this because they have tools that allow companies to do customer and reseller training and extended enterprise training, but they're both Ashley and Francis they're referring to their own experience because they provide this kind of training for their customers, right? They provide software, and so they provide training to their customers. So if you have any specific questions about what they do, this is a really good resource for that. So I want to throw that in there. And Chris's question that you put in the Q&A is a great one. I think I want to hold it for the discussion part at the end because I think there's a little bit more that we want to dig in there. So we can see the question and just hang on for that one. So yeah, one of the issues that keeps coming up when I talk to companies about this kind of arrangement is that because you're talking about these different external groups, very often within the organization, it's hard to know exactly who owns the relationship with those groups. Especially, you're talking about customers, you're talking about resellers. So is it marketing? Is it sales? Is it operations? Who owns that? And then to what degree are they taking accountability or ownership of the training that's needed? Maybe nobody has ownership of the training because they always thought it belonged to somebody else. Maybe there is no training that's happening. So there's a real need to get an alignment around, okay, this is how it works in our organization as far as who owns the relationships. And then here's how much we're willing to either cooperate or abdicate our ownership of the training to, say, the L&D team, or how are we going to work together on that? And then again, because of those different groups, they also utilize a lot of different technologies. So, you may think off the bat, well, it's training, so it's going to be coming out of the LMS. That's not always the case. It could actually be being generated through a CRM or even just a web portal that customers have access to. So really getting a feel for not only, okay, what's the internal infrastructure around, accountability, but then what's the technology infrastructure? What do we need? What don't we need? What things need to work together? So that's the biggest challenge that I hear from organizations coming through. But then from our research, we asked, what are the challenges that you're facing in these extended enterprise environments? To me, unsurprisingly, difficulty measuring effectiveness is number one. And that's because, to me, that's always been the number one response, no matter what kind of learning we're talking about, internal, external, sales training, what have you. Measuring the effectiveness is always very difficult. Companies have gotten pretty good at measuring completion rates, getting grades on tests and survey feedback, or like smile sheets, but really seeing how much of an impact is the learning having. Companies say they're really difficult. It's difficult internally. Then you look at these external audiences, it's even more difficult because these people don't work for you. You don't necessarily have any line of sight to what happens after the training. So it's just that much more challenging. Then also building the content that you're going to use for these folks. We all, as learning professionals, we like to think that we're creating this great, impactful, effective, engaging content. But the truth is, for internal audiences, you've got sort of a captive audience, right? They work for the organization. You're trying to help, trying to create content for them. But I don't think the learning gets looked at as much as, say, an external product might for your customers. Well, in this case, training for customers is part of the product offering. And so there's a lot more scrutiny paid to content development. Having the right technology to manage this kind of environment, and we're going to get into some of the technology requirements, but 38% say that that's challenged. So you can see some of these different things that companies say are difficult. And I always say, take whatever challenges you're having with your internal audiences and then, multiply that by 10 when you start to look at these external audiences. One other thing that's adding to the complexity is just the sheer different types of modalities that are needed to really operate in these environments. Again, internally, organizations are trying to provide more and different modalities and opportunities for learning. We saw a huge shift, obviously, due to the pandemic, away from in-person ILT. This research data is from 2020 when it was first hitting. So there's still a lot of ILT going on, but you can still see there's a really widespread. Now you're talking about these external audiences, much more dispersed, varied, and different than your internal audiences. So a much stronger requirement for a different set of opportunities for modalities. But, Francis, talk a little bit about what you've seen, especially in the last couple of years, is the shift here for these extended audiences and the kind of modalities that are going to be required.
Yeah, and it's related to what you were talking about in the previous slide around the challenge around measuring effectiveness. And really, obviously there's some challenge around where do you get that data and do you have the skill set to analyze that data? But really the big challenge is, what are you trying to measure? What results are you looking to measure? And so that's where, when we start talking about the modalities and how people are using different modalities, I know that there's a challenge, and we feel this ourselves, but I can see that with our customers, of what are the results that you've identified that you want your training programs to deliver, and what are the modalities that are going to do that. I find that people usually think about on-demand or anything that's online as just something that is less expensive and more scalable, but subpar to anything that is live and in person. And I would really challenge yourself, and so everyone on this call and everyone in your organization, to really think about that, if that's true, and to really look at, if it's an in-person training, is that the most effective way to deliver the content to get the results that you're trying to achieve? So is sitting together in a room and listening to someone go through slides that describe how to use a product, is just because it's in person, is that the most effective way of delivering that training? And actually, no, I feel like I can say that, and that really having an experience where someone could be sitting at their laptop and watching a video, and then also working on the software and going through some simulations themselves, that might be the most effective and the most scalable way to do that. So when we look at these, I think it's, again, important to see, how do these modalities serve our intended results versus what sort of preconceptions do we have about what is sort of the most effective way of training people.
Yeah, and maybe just on that point as well with the challenges, I think you can create some really nice conversations internally. Like, if your training for your employees is owned by someone separate to the customers and someone separate to the partners, often you're running really fast in your own direction, and you're just really concerned with your learning group. But if you can step back and create some conversations around how we train, I've learned from Francis now what we're saying about customer training and ILTs, and I've really taken that away and thought, okay, sometimes I favor ILTs for employees, but actually, is that the best training modality? So I think there's just, you almost can create a thought leadership circle or a way for people in your company to interact over training if you're maybe that little bit more siloed as well.
And I thought about that, one of the first slides around company priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And really, I think that's a good way of, if we're thinking about these modalities, there is a real need to deliver timely, relevant information. And then there also is, and there's a need for people to have maybe spaces where they are educating themselves more in a silo, and then times where it's important to come together as larger groups or smaller groups or leadership groups. And so when you have those business priorities, then I think it's thinking about the modalities on this slide and what is the most impactful way to deliver that training to achieve that result. Sonia, I'm just seeing that you have multiple modalities, ILTs, videos, webinars, printed materials. I think that's great just from a learning science perspective of having different ways for people to engage in content, but also having different things for different purposes that serve your results. And the part I think that sometimes gets overlooked, and it's a challenge for us internally. Also, what is the need to revise and update that content? And so making sure that if you have high value content that needs to be updated frequently, that you pick a modality that allows you to do that in the most efficient way. Because having outdated content, it doesn't matter how beautiful or highly produced the video is. If it's out of date, it's no longer going to be as effective.
Oh, Dave, I think you're on mute.
I am, of course. So this just a bit of data just goes back to the beginning where I was talking about how the biggest challenge is measuring the effectiveness. And so we look in, okay, so how are you measuring the effectiveness of your extended enterprise learning? And most of the ways that it's being done are very sort of surface transactional types of measurements, right? Course completions, getting that learner feedback survey, some sort of assessment. And some of these even sound like they may be the same thing. Some of the terms are interchangeable. This is just how organizations refer to them, but like surveys. Then you start, you see this drop off, and then you see performance data finally there. So only about 32% use that. And then like predetermined KPIs, key performance indicators, way down at the bottom. You even have 15% that just say, well, we don't do it. We can't really measure it. We're just creating it, getting it out there, and that's all that matters. So it really is a huge challenge, and it actually ties into a question that came in. And I'll go through the whole question here, but saying that I had heard that some execs say that qualitative feedback from learners is invalid to demonstrate training effectiveness. The question asker says that they disagree with this, but wondering if there's any data that demonstrates that positive association with the product itself is positively linked to the learning experience around that product. And to me, this question gets at one of the very key inherent challenges with learning measurement that happens, whether it's internal learning, external. It's learning teams often say, well, there are too many other variables. We cannot say that we're responsible for that performance outcome because too many other things happen at the same time as this learning. And I think you see the same thing in that question that you ask is, well, how do we know that this positive response to the product is related to the training? It could be just a really great product. And, obviously one would hope, yes, it is a great product. That's the whole point of the organization's existence. But I would hazard to say that learning, if there is training for that product, I think there is a way to determine correlations between the training for the product and the satisfaction with that product. It isn't all in one. It isn't solely on the back of training, but clearly you look at how you can look at customer satisfaction scores, and then you can compare to these customers, which ones took the training or which ones took it and finished it, which ones took it, didn't like it, and then see how their customer satisfaction scores compare and change with that. So yeah, it's really there. And I think the feedback from learners is hugely valid for a number of reasons. A, that the big picture is, do they even like or are able to use the products well? But then just, okay, what about feedback about the learning itself? Am I getting learner feedback that says this is good, this works, this is how it should be, or maybe fix this, maybe fix that, that doesn't work? That kind of feedback loop is critical to making sure that the learning is going. I mean, you wouldn't shut off any sort of customer feedback loop that you have for your products and services. So you definitely wouldn't want to cut that feedback loop off for the customer training as well. As we jump into the role of technology, anything, Ashley or Francis, that you wanted to add maybe to that question or that idea?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you brought up with that, and you know, the challenges around I think sorry, I'll say challenges, but I think fear, right? We are, especially those of us who are in learning and training, and the idea that we would say, yes, our work is responsible for employee retention or for revenue growth or for product adoption. That's scary. It's daunting. And so it is easier sometimes to fall back on, let's measure completion, let's measure engagement, let's measure sort of survey results around, you know, how much did you enjoy this course? But I would just, again, David, I love that you said, just remind ourselves that this is not a causation, this is a correlation. And so we should be having that conversation both internally with our teams, but also there's a huge opportunity to, again, moving out of that cost center model to really showcase what your training programs are doing to drive real results for your company or your organization.
Yep. I think that's, you know, the idea of completion rates, it's great data. It's important data to collect. You have to collect that, but then all by itself, it tells you almost nothing. Unless you're able to correlate it with something else, like, okay, people aren't completing it. Okay, can we correlate that to something else? Are they giving you bad feedback scores, you know, or what is it that's causing that? Or when they do complete it, what else happens? And if people want to turn their attention to the chat for a sec, Chris Bundigan made it a comment here about an approach that he took recently, was tracking the time between taking the training and the customer taking a specific action that they had wanted the customer to take. And they found that there was a 3.84 day relationship between course completion and that product adoption event that they were looking for, and help make the case that says, when we do this, this happens, right? So you've got that completion. Okay, we know that they completed it. Is this other thing happening? And that's a way to track it. So I appreciate you sharing that example, Chris. That's exactly kind of what we're talking about here. So appreciate that. So yeah, so moving into you know, the bit about technology here, and obviously Ashley and Francis know quite a bit about this. This is what they do, but you know, we asked, how are you delivering to that extended enterprise? So mostly it's the LMS, but again, lots of different ways: website, in-house developed system that you might be using, or even just a YouTube channel that you might have set up. So there's a lot of different things at play, and it's usually not just one thing, but really getting a handle on how do we consolidate where possible, how do we streamline so that there's, you know, standardization and accountability for all of these things. It's pretty important to think through, because we have found that technology plays a huge role in the extended enterprise. Because look, we're talking about external audiences. The technology is the lifeline between the organization and its intended audience, whether it's franchisees or customers or what have you. We found that 79% of organizations say that technology had either a medium or a high impact on the effectiveness, you know, or saying that it was, this is saying that there was, to them, it was a main reason why their extended enterprise learning was effective, which is a pretty strong result there. But, you know, let's talk a little bit about that, you know, the progression towards how we can have that kind of technology could have a high impact. Francis.
Yeah, so this one is interesting to me because I think there's a lot of parallels on the customer training side or the external audience training side, and on the employee training side, where maybe 10 years ago, I don't think we would have had this 54% at medium. I think that would have been much more trending towards the low. But now I think that there's a general acceptance of needing technology as a way to train your audiences, but almost as sort of a tick box exercise. So do we have a modality do we have some sort of software to deliver training experiences to these audiences? And yes, and David, you had that slide earlier about sort of what all of those options possibly are. But there's still so much opportunity and, need really here to say that, we look at technology as, cost saving, but also it's a line item. It's something that you have to purchase. And so for something that is having a medium impact on the effectiveness of learning, I think there is a real opportunity here to think about how, if depending on where you are on that spectrum, to move that towards high. I was really interested, I think Sonia, you had this comment around really struggling, wanting to measure effectiveness, but not having the funding to do so. And I just second that, as I hear that all the time. And I think it's something I've struggled with too, not so much in terms of funding, but just in terms of time to measure effectiveness. But I also know that when budgets get tight, or when cost cutting needs to come into place, and it's oftentimes the training programs that are looked at as the cost center of we need to cut this, versus our training programs. And again, if we move the needle here so that our effectiveness was high instead of medium, that would be the place that when there was cost saving measures that needed to take place, we would look to our training programs to say, how is this technology going to help us reduce costs, or how is it going to drive sales results in our business? So I'm excited about this trend. I think it's going in a direction that is really positive in terms of driving a conversation around the impact that learning has and who it can reach, and who has access to training. But also interesting that I would say it's a given that technology is needed to deliver training, and we're still saying it has a medium impact on our programs.
Right. Yeah, and so some of the things that companies want from their technology so that they can get to that higher impact, we'll listen here. These are the requirements that they say, this is what we need from an extended enterprise learning technology solution. And so no surprise, reporting analytics, right? If our biggest challenge is measurement and analytics, then we need robust reporting and analytics tools. And that's clearly been a challenge for L&D teams, especially since it's hard to get, real data science or data analyst skill sets in the learning team. So they need tools that allow people who maybe aren't data scientists to better run some of these correlations that, like we had mentioned before, be able to ask those kinds of questions and get answers. This need for mobile device access is important. Again, that goes to not having complete access or control over your audience. So being able to reach them when and where they are is important. The testing and assessment tools, right, that feeds into the reporting. We need something to be able to generate some data. We need to make sure that there's data security protocols, because we're talking about external audiences, external people outside of the organization. We need to make sure our data is secure. They want to have a social platform, so it's collaborative. Keep those either reseller networks, keep them communicating, or if it's customers, keep them communicating. The franchise model, people can share their concerns, their best practices, but being able to have people connected and collaborating within that learning experience. Multiple domains, the ability to say, okay, I've got this one learning tool, this technology that I have, but I've got all these different audiences, and they each need their own unique look and feel. To be able to do that, to be able to create multiple domains so that this one platform can power all of those different experiences. So those are some of the big key elements in there. I know there was a couple here that you wanted to focus on and get into a little more detail on there, Francis, but.
Yeah, so the nimbleness is the word that comes to mind when you think about the technology needs here, that learners can access the content when and where they need it. So the example that always comes to mind is a customer that we work with who their storefront selling golf equipment. And so they actually are on they're on the B2C side of things. And so they get training from the different golf equipment suppliers, and they get training and they train their sales teams on those equipment. But their sales team needs access to that training information on the floor. So they're working with a customer on new golf clubs or new cleats, and they need the information about what the product is made of, or what type of environments they can use it in. And so they need to have that on their phone or immediately available on a laptop at a front desk. And so the nimbleness there, but in being able to provide a mobile solution, a cloud-based solution, I think is paramount. And then the other thing about the cloud piece of it and the nimbleness, and it's not here, but we have a group of customers that we meet together once a month in sort of a thought leadership group. And I asked them what was on their mind for this was at the beginning of the year. And I asked them what was top of mind for them in 2022. And it's interesting. They said integrations, and they said that is the thing that they know that they need to do in the next year to integrate their systems and really driving to that point around reporting and analytics. And so it's not now one piece of software that's going to spit out the reporting and analytics that you need. It's actually your suite of software that you need to speak to each other to give you that information. And so I would just underscore there the importance of cloud-based and then nimbleness in the delivery system, but also nimbleness in terms of integrating with your other software tools.
Yeah, and maybe just to jump in there as well, I think what's really interesting is what you need for your core learners, whether that's your customers, your partners, your employees, that technology should be the same. There should be some really nice synergy there. And you want all those people in the same place. You don't end up with 3 different platforms. But in terms of measuring training effectiveness, that data is going to live in your performance management system for your employees, your CRM, and I know we're going to kind of go into that now. So, it's trying to supercharge your integrations. And one thing that we found is, as an internal team, it's hard to get resources to build integrations. It might be easier for the customer facing team. And now we kind of share a bit of an integration strategy with our own LMS, which is LearnUpon. So that's just been a really nice outcome of working a bit closer together with the customer training team as well.
Yeah, no, thank you both for digging into the integrations. It is a key point. I really just have this up here so as to get people to start thinking about, oh yeah, there are these different platforms that are involved. And you both hit on this key point, this technology integrations. Yes, on the one hand, there is sort of an IT level to it we want it to be seamless. We want things to work together well. But a big key of this is that measurement and analytics piece, because if you're not integrated with these other systems that deal with those audiences or anything internally, then you're only going to have the data that is being generated by your learning platform, which that's not, the bad, but it can only tell you so much until you start to correlate that and start to look at it through the context of these other platforms. That's when you're going to start to see what the outcomes may be, right? Are these other things happening? What's changing via, the marketing platform, the CRM, what have you? So yeah, these integrations, it's really important to have an understanding of what are the touch points within my particular organization for these different groups. And then does the solution I either currently have or want to get or need to look for, how well does it integrate with what I have for my internal ecosystems is very important. And I thought we were talking before, and Francis, I think you guys work with someone, as an organization, one of your clients, and you want to talk a little bit specifically about their integration with the CRM?
Yeah, so the CRM and LMS integration, I just think is a no-brainer in that you have your training results in your CRM, but you also now have your customer data, your sales data in your CRM, and those should really be speaking together. With LearnUpon, we have an integration built into Salesforce, so you can pull in your training data to be able to look at your information around, can you look at prospects who are completing some initial training courses, and are they more likely to close a deal? Are they more likely to complete a sale? Can you look at your churn information in your CRM, and can you look at your training data and say customers who don't engage with training have a higher chance of churning? and sometimes, those are all positive scenarios, but like, let's also be honest with ourselves of let's look at where there might not be a correlation where there should. So we'd make an assumption that customers who engage robustly in training programs should be less likely to churn. But what if you look at that data and realize that there isn't that correlation? And so now really important to dig into your content to think about what should we be doing that would build out that correlation. So definitely that integration really important in the CRM. I'll let Aisling talk a little bit about measuring the employee performance and how you might look to your CRM for that. But I did also just want to say here around integrations that also keep the learner in mind. One thing that we learned and experienced during the first year of the pandemic, if not more, of just the password fatigue and people feeling just real stress and anxiety in their lives about where the state of the world was and, things in their personal life. And so not being able to log into something or having to create an account or reset a password just felt like a huge burden. And I mean that with real empathy. And so that was something that I took away too, of let's respect our learners and both their time and their emotional state and reducing their stress and providing integration so that they don't need to log into new systems every time. And we leverage the power of single sign-on and our other integrations so that we really aren't asking people to spend their valuable time figuring out how to log into systems.
Yeah. And I think the benefit of integrations from an employee perspective is similar where it allows you to meet the learner where you are. We want our sales team not to have to come out of Salesforce. We want them to be in there closing deals, working with prospects. I want them to click, one button away and be in their training instance. And I think to Frances's point as well, we should see a correlation between high training engagement and performance. But if we don't see that correlation, that's something, for my team to take away and really analyze. Is our training impactful? Is it effective? And is it delivering what the learners need? And I think that kind of insight is really invaluable.
Yeah. And the ease of use that the right integrations can bring, you both mentioned it. It's so critical because you think about it for an internal audience. Think of the feedback you get when your internal employees are having those kind of challenges, right? I can't log into this, or I have to jump from this and this, these two things. So think of like the kind of feedback you get around that. And at the end of the day, those employees are going to have to figure it out and continue on regardless until if that's ever fixed. Now, think of that as a customer or a reseller partner who, if they run into an issue like that, that's it. They're done. They won't continue on, right? You may get feedback that it didn't work, but now they've moved on, and you've sort of lost that opportunity. So yeah, those kinds of thoughts into that integration standpoint are so important because, like I said, take anything that is a problem internally, multiply it by 10 when you're dealing with an external audience for sure. All right, so moving into sort of how do we move forward? And I know we've already talked a lot about few different strategies. We've answered a couple of questions. There's more questions we're going to answer. I won't spend too much time. This is just showing that organizations, generally feel as though their extended enterprise efforts are somewhat effective. This is actually pretty good. If you look at it, it's 56% saying it's either effective or highly effective. That's actually pretty good compared to the marks they usually give their internal efforts. So generally, they feel as though they're kind of effective, but there's obviously plenty of room for improvement. Some of the things to think about, I think I brought this up earlier, this idea around multiple domains. It's very important for a lot of reasons. The branding, maybe your organization has multiple brands within it. I know of a few that in that franchise model that I expressed, they have different restaurant brands that are out there. So they have one sort of look and feel for one group and then another for the other, but it's all powered by the same tool. But be customizing those environments, making sure that people are getting what they need and not what they don't, and then also being able to actually push out admin permissions down those chains, right? If you've built all these domains for this group, I can have somebody in that audience, right, be an admin up to a certain level. Let's say those are resellers, but for customers, I can't let somebody have that much permissions, so they can have an admin that can only do this much. So being able to set those kind of permissions as well. Lots of things to think about when you're looking at the tools that you're looking for. Depends on your specific environment, of course. Then we go, we come back to this measurement piece because it is so important. it all begins with what are the key metrics that we should be looking at, and we should know what those are from the very start before we put the programs together, before we build the content, send it out. What are we after? Do we know how we're going to be able to measure it? What are the sort of performance-based outcomes we can be measured? You know, we saw the example in the chat around, well, we knew there was this one action we wanted customers to take based on the training, so let's track that. You know, obviously those kind of things exist. The good news is, for a lot of these external audiences, especially customers, especially resellers, learning may not have immediate access to a lot of the data around what's happening with those groups, but your organization is tracking them, right? There's a lot of attention paid to how customers are behaving. There's a lot of attention paid to how things are being sold and whether or not they're being sold. It could be anything from, you know, deal size to sales cycle, how long does it take, all of these things, or from a customer standpoint, customer satisfaction, support tickets, things like that. That information is being collected. So getting access to that, knowing how to use it, how to leverage it, how to correlate it with what learning is doing is what's going to be key. And then, of course, gets into, well, okay, who owns those things? Do I have a relationship with that group, with that person? Am I able to get that data? Do I know where it is? Do I know what it looks like? Do I know what the standards are? We saw this come up in the chat too, this idea that there's a lot of data disparity from these different systems. That's a big thing to take on when you start to get into the measurement of things. And you know, talk a little bit, for instance, because I know this is something that you guys focus on when you talk to your clients about the extended enterprise. You know, you do a lot of focus on measurement. So talk a little bit about reporting and getting into some deeper data.
Yeah, so I actually think the first thing I would say is before we go deep, we want to look at the very top and ask some broad questions around, at a business, are we looking to reduce costs? Are we looking to increase revenue? Are we looking to reduce risk? And there are some other things to look at here, but I think the important question to ask before even we jump into what our metrics are to ask ourselves those questions. And they're really commercial questions. And sometimes that's a challenge for those of us who are in L&D and in training, that we are thinking about what those learning metrics are and what those suite of metrics are: completion, engagement, satisfaction. But first to say, okay, what are our results? Our revenue results, our cost reducing results, our risk reducing results, and risk reduction might be compliance training, things like that. And then let's think about what those metrics are, because I think sometimes we limit our thinking if we think about metrics first before we think about, okay, what are those results? And so then we can start diving into, and I think that opens up other things that might not be, again, in our wheelhouse of how we think about training metrics. So an example that I might give around if one of our results that we're looking to reduce costs, and so we might be looking at a time to resolution on our customer support tickets, because that's very much related to cost savings. And that's where we then have to step out of our silo of our training teams and now talk to our support teams around, hey, what data do you have to measure time to resolution on support tickets? And what data do we have on the training side to show engagement and training from our support team? And can we come together to look at those metrics around how we're improving the performance of our support team via our training programs and ultimately delivering a result for our business? And it's not an easy thing to do, but it's also a really exciting project that we can be working on in collaboration. To be fully transparent, Aisling and I had lots of conversations in prepping for this call with all of you today, and probably came up with a list of 10 things that we should be doing to better collaborate in terms of how she's thinking about employee learning and how I'm thinking about customer learning. So even just having those conversations opens up a lot of those opportunities and just information about what are other teams measuring? What is it that they're looking at? What information do they have that they could share?
And if you touched on this, some of this already, and I think it's important just to finish off here as we get to the end, and we'll get to some of the questions that came. But this e-commerce, being able to generate revenue, selling the training, the training becomes the product. And there's a lot of different ways this works, whether it's already baked into the sale of the product, right? The training is included, or maybe it's separate from that, or maybe it's an association that's what we do. The training, again, the training is the product, we sell it. So very important to think through the e-commerce. Are we able to accept multiple payments? Do we understand the tax and currency issues where we operate? And then again, it all comes down to, is there an opportunity for the L&D to generate revenue, right? So that complete shift, not just from a cost center, but then to cost savings to actually generating revenue. And, Francis, you mentioned quite a few of these things around that, but any other points you want to make on monetizing training content before we get into some of the questions?
Just because Sonia, you brought up that question about funding too, and I think the most successful examples I've seen are people who think about their training team as a business within a business. And so I have a customer who they sell some of their content to their customers. They have an e-commerce model, but they don't do it as a business line to the sort of overall revenue objectives of the business. They do it as a way to support their training program, to pay for their software, to pay for their instructional designers, to pay for their research initiatives. And they generate a 5-figure number every month on selling their training, but they don't really tell anybody that they make that money. They just pour that back into their training programs to drive overall revenue for the business. So here I would think about it as a way to be entrepreneurial in having your own training enterprise. I think there's some really exciting opportunities here and showcasing the value of your content.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. So just leave those takeaways up. It's sort of just an encapsulation of some of the things that we had already talked about. I do want to get to one of the questions that actually came in pretty early on, but I thought it was good for a discussion. Advice on how to build internal relationships and processes to ensure that training comes out with new releases. And so to me, like, my first impression on that was, okay, I would imagine that the sales team, whether it's internal or external, is going to want training on these products before they have to go sell them, right? They need to understand how they work, how they're going to sell them. So I think whatever process is in place that sets that up and makes sure that training is complete and ready to roll out when the product releases or updates, the step needs to be added of don't forget your customers, right? Because obviously they're going to get slightly different training than the salespeople might, but a lot of that information is still in there. So it's, they can work in parallel. But I think it's important to inject that into that because whoever's responsible for the sales training, they're clearly at least invested in, if not accountable for, those customer relationships. And so making sure that they're able to deliver training to the clients around that time as well, release time, that step just has to be added into the whole cycle. Not knowing full, Chris, how your organization's operating and what your setup is, that's just my initial pass on that. But any thoughts about that around, like, how do you guys manage this when you have an update or a new function or feature or even a new product?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. And it's definitely something that's still a bit of a challenge for us. Like, we do have a good process. And I think maybe some advice is just make sure whoever looks after your product training is really tightly integrated with the product team. And that sometimes you just have to really keep up that relationship to make sure that you are aware of when things are happening. And look, it'll happen to all of us that a release comes out early, it comes out late. And I think you're a little bit at the mercy of those timelines, and that can make it really tough to get the training to our sales team on time, and then, to your point, David, to your customers on time. But I think what we find works really well is just having a monthly sales update where we're sharing product updates. So we create a meeting, we create a forum, and it just means, everyone knows that they're gearing towards that each month and sharing something. So that can be something simple. We would always follow up with an e-learning course in the LMS plus an assignment as well to make sure we chatted about earlier, like, how can you make sure your product training is effective? What works really well internally is just getting everyone to record an assignment, and that we can actually see that they've got that skill or that talk track around the new release. So that's how we're making it work from an internal perspective. And then, Francis, you probably have some good customer stuff.
I think just the efficiency around thinking about, okay, what information do you need to give your audiences about what the feature is and how it works? And for the most part, you can deliver that to all of your audiences with the exact same messaging. So creating that content and saying and having a plan to, let's create a how-to course that we can share across our employees, our partners, our customers. And then this is where the different modalities come in, where I can say for myself on the customer success team, where my expectation is that my team takes that course and they understand what it is and how to use it. And then we come together as a team to talk about what is our strategy for how we work with our customers to increase product adoption around this. But if you, that's where I think you want to think about your content and what part is doing what. And so we've gotten a lot better about, with myself and Aisling and our product marketing teams of, let's make sure we have information to give to people and to give to our customers. And then, as she said, opportunities to then engage in smaller groups where we might focus or drill down on particular messaging or a particular strategy.
Excellent. All right. Well, we went ahead. We went a little over the hour. I appreciate everyone sticking around, and we did answer the questions that came in as they did. So I really appreciate people asking the questions and joining the chat and sharing your examples. That's been really, really fascinating. Hopefully, people got a chance to take some stuff from the chat. Very important stuff. Again, obviously, Francis and Aisling, thank you so much for your time and joining us today and providing your insights and thoughts around this. The Extended Enterprise is a very big and complex thing. So I think it's always helpful to have some guidance. And of course, thanks to LearnerPond for putting on the hour for us today. And yeah, so I'll just want to say thank you both. And I'll leave it to you to maybe say a couple last words.
Thanks, all. Excited to read through all of your questions. They're great. And I have some even ideas that I'm sending back to my team. So thanks for being so engaged and geeking out with us about learning metrics and strategy.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And definitely feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or wherever it might be if you want to keep the conversation going. And thank you so much, David.
Thank you. All right, we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Bye, all.